and welcome back to the Across the Pod NFL podcast. The 2024 NFL Draft is now complete, and we are here to review it. And as ever, I am your host, Andy Davis, and this week I'm joined by two of our three guests who appeared in our mock draft episode. Back with us today, first of all, is Freddy Harper-Davis. Freddy, how are you?
I'm really good, particularly as the Dolphins draft could have gone a lot better had it not been for a certain team that I support. So yeah, it's a good weekend. I enjoyed the draft very much, and yeah, there's plenty to talk about, and certainly a few people reaching a bit further than they perhaps should have done.
Oh boy, and there's really one place to start with that. But before we do that, our second guest back with us today is Bengals fan and the touchdowns, Rory-Jo Daniels. Rory, how are you?
Yeah, not too bad. Recovered a bit now. A couple of nights sleep after the first couple, so yeah, feeling good now. Ready to look into it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was. Also, I don't think the first round was maybe as dramatic as other years. There was no sort of. You had the one we could talk about in a minute, but apart from that, there was no sort of draft day trade. Like AJ Brown back in the day, or there was no sort of. I don't think there was too much drama. A few trades here and there, but overall, I don't think. I think there's been more drama-filled NFL drafts, but I think certainly we had our share of dramatic moments, and no more so than our first talking point, which is going to be the Atlanta Falcons. Actually, before we do that, in terms of our draft picks, so in total, Freddie had two correct draft picks. So he had the Jaden Daniels pick to the Commanders. Rory-Jo had two. Sorry, with Jaden Daniels and Malik Neighbors both correctly guessed to go to the Commanders and the Giants. And Freddie also had two. Now I'm trying to find his. Byron Murphy was one, going to the Seahawks at 16. And the other one was, of course, Marvin Harrison Jr. going to the Arizona Cardinals. I had one correct prediction, which was, of course, Caleb Williams. And then I'm going to give Rory-Jo half a point as well, because he did correctly predict Iowa's Cooper DeJean to go to the Eagles, but it was in the second round and not in our first round mock draft. So in the end, Rory gets 2.5 points. Freddie gets 2, I get 1, and Sam sadly had 0 correct score. So yeah, apologies if Sam is listening. But yeah, as mentioned before, only one place to start. It is the Atlanta Falcons, who shocked everyone with the 8th overall pick. I mean, we had Dallas Turner go into the Falcons in our mock draft, but in the end, it was Michael Penix Jr., who we projected to go to the Raiders. Sam predicted them to go 19th, sorry, to the Patriots 19th. And yeah, it was, I thought, a strange pick. I mean, I know there's been a lot of different opinions, mainly negative. I myself did a TikTok about it. Do check it out, Andy Talks NFL. Well, I basically said it was an idiotic move because for me personally, why would you pay a quarterback $180 million for a 4-year deal if they were going to be your guy? And I get the whole fact that he is 35 and he probably going to not last a full contract, but you never know. He may last a full 4 years and do it that way. And Michael Penix is already 23, 24 when the season begins. If Kirk Cousins lasts out his deal as a starter in Atlanta, Penix will be 28 when that chance to start becomes. I just feel like I get why, because they're going for the whole Jordan Love tactic, or the Brett Favre to Rodgers method, or letting a guy sit behind someone, or even look at Mahomes with Alex Smith. But at the same time, I think with the injury concerns he had in college, and just the fact that they had the whole pick of the defensive player to choose. I mean, it was a record-setting draft in terms of not only the attendance, the most ever. I think over 700,000 people were there, but also the most consecutive picks on offense. I think it was 14 before eventually Latu was taken by the Colts for 15. So for me, I just felt like they could have got anyone in a team that isn't exactly the best in the league for defense. I think that could have been, they could have gone someone in 2 years' time. But there are some that feel like Cousins won't last for 4 years, and maybe Penix is there. He will be there straight away to come in. But I personally think it was a stupid move, and they could live to have the last laugh. But at the same time, I do feel like it was, for me, it's just a really strange move. But Rory-Jo, what was your take on that move?
Yeah, baffling one, really. In terms, I think the biggest thing for me is obviously the age of Penix. I think if they'd have gone JJ McCarthy in that route, you could see it more obviously. I mean, that was the thing with the Jordan Love, Aaron Rodgers, was that Love was quite a raw prospect, obviously later in the first round as well, and had age on his side. So obviously he developed behind Rodgers, whereas Penix has had a lot of time in college. He's pretty maxed out in terms of what we know he can do. I don't think there's a lot of development that's going to go on behind Cousins. So it's baffling. It sets it off on the wrong foot, I think, as well for Cousins to have somebody come in straight away that's got the pressure of being a first round pick. And I think I understand what they were saying. I know their justification for it was we're not going to be picking this high because Cousins is that good that he's going to get us into the 20. You know, we'll be picking in the 20s, hopefully win a Super Bowl, something like that. But at the same time, if you think Cousins is going to take you to a Super Bowl window, then surely a top 10 pick can only bolster that. If you give him Rome Odunze in that position and give him another weapon, then that's, to me, seemed like the obvious pick at that point. So it was a shocker, and I still can't get my head around it, whatever way I look at it.
Yeah, I mean, and Freddie, I'm sure you share the same sentiment as me and Rory on that pick. Or do you have the same opinion as the Falcons?
No, I'll play devil's advocate because I completely agree with both of you. But on the flip side, the Falcons are pretty loaded on offense as it is. They've already got Bijan Robinson. They've already got Drake London. They've already got Kyle Pitts. They've brought in Rondale Moore. They've got Tyler Algier. There's lots of weapons there for Cousins to use. You know what my pick was in the mock draft? It was Dallas Turner, and I stick by it. I think that would have been their best move at that position because they desperately need some sort of pass rush, and that's something that they were lacking last year because they've got talented players on their defense, and the one player that comes straight to mind is Jesse Bates. So there's a quality team there that I think we're pass rusher short, but I can see what they're doing. Again, Kirk Cousins has just come off a long-term injury, so there's that issue there. And we had the same thing with Aaron Rodgers and Jordan Love 3 or 4 years ago when the pick was made, and everyone was like, "What the hell are the Packers doing? Why are you doing this?" And it turned out to be a very good move. So you can see it on that flip side, but yeah, as Rory's already mentioned, Penix is older. You can't quite see where the big jump's going to come from. Where you could possibly, I'm not the biggest JJ McCarthy fan, but he was the guy that could potentially make that jump. Whereas Penix and Bo Nix, who's gone to Denver, I'm not sure that there's a big development there for either of them. So yeah, I'm not sure what the Falcons were doing, but we shall see.
Yeah, I mean, there's that obviously arguing that most of the sort of best quarterbacks of all time in the NFL history have sat behind. And Brady wasn't the first choice. He's behind Bledsoe at one point. Holmes was behind Alex Smith. Rodgers was behind Brett Favre. You know, and there's a lot of quarterbacks that they come in young, they get put in week one, first year, rookie year. You know, I think we've seen CJ Stroud excel, but we've seen other quarterbacks struggle. I mean, Zach Wilson struggled. Bo Nix could easily be in that category. There's a lot of quarterbacks who come in young. They're a bad team. They get picked high in the draft because that team's bad to be picking there in the first place. They struggle in year one or year two, and they just lose all confidence. And in the end, their NFL career is pretty much over before it began. So I think, in a way, I think the best thing for Falcons for me is if Cousins, after 2 years, leaves, or maybe, you know, or if he retires or injury. I think the whole 4 years is a long time to wait. But if you give him 2 years, say if Cousins has 2 years there, and then Penix beats him out in training camp, or injury happens to Cousins, Penix comes in, never looks back, then I think that's the perfect situation because you have given him time to develop. I just feel like 4 years without starting, someone's going to want to leave at one point. And I think if I was Kirk Cousins, I would ask for a trade, but at the same time, he 35. He probably realizes that he's not going to be there for too long. He's probably there for a short-term fix. 4 years at most. He'll be 39 if that deal ends, and that's pretty much for most quarterbacks where that story ends in their career. So Cousins isn't exactly, you know, a world-beating quarterback. He's a good but not elite quarterback. So yeah, I think there's definitely method in the madness, but I just question whether that method is a good one. You mentioned it there. We mentioned our quarterbacks, a record as well. 6 quarterbacks taken in the first 12 picks. This was, of course, Williams, number 1 to the Bears. Jaden Daniels number 2 to the Washington Commanders. No one traded that for the third pick, so Patriots took Drake May. And then later on, Jason McCarthy went to the Vikings 10th overall. Of course, Penix 8th overall. And then Bo Nix, Denver Broncos, just a few picks later on. Now, you mentioned him before, Malik Neighbors. He was the second wide receiver taken, the first of that sort of second branch after the big gap between Harrison Jr. and the rest. And Malik Neighbors was seen as that guy. So he was taken not long before Roma Dunes. And I don't know whether you boys have seen this, but the body language from Malik Neighbors, for me, screams he does not want to be at the Giants. Freddy, what was your take? I don't know whether you have seen that footage, but does that strike any worry to you? The fact that he is adamantly, seemingly not happy about receiving balls from Daniel Jones.
I thought of all the teams to make a fairly surprise quarterback pick, I thought the Giants were nailed on to do that, because surely they've got to move on from Daniel Jones at some point. Because he's clearly not going to take them to the next level. That team's an absolute mess. We thought in year one of the new coach and the new system, where they got to the playoffs, won a playoff game, we thought, right, this is the turning point for the Giants, and it's just gone downhill. And they obviously don't have Saquon Barkley anymore because he's gone to the Eagles. And yeah, I can completely understand why Neighbors was like, well, why am I coming to a team where realistically I can't see them competing anytime soon? So I don't really blame him.
No, I mean, I will say I think when Stephon Diggs joined the Bills, I don't think Josh Allen was seen as that quarterback that he is now, and I think maybe you could argue that someone like Neighbors could turn Daniel Jones into at least a middle of the range quarterback than what he is now. I remember we go back to that season, the first in the wrong day, but I remember being at Jacksonville when they beat the Jaguars, and they were I think they went 6-1, and just seems a far cry from when they went 6-1 to what it's like now. And Daniel Jones had that 1 year, but I think the franchise will regret for a long time not paying Barkley over Jones in that, when they had that choice between the two players, one to franchise tag, one to sign. I think they ultimately would regret that. And the irony is that they could have gone out and got Penix or McCarthy or someone this year, but obviously they're sticking with Daniel Jones for now. Maybe they feel giving him Neighbors gives him one more chance to prove he can do it. I think maybe their thinking is, if he can't do it with one of the best prospects wide receiver wise, then when can he do it? So for me, yeah, I wouldn't be happy about that, but maybe Neighbors might feel in a few weeks that actually, if Jones does suck, then maybe someone else come in and be a better fit for me. And of course, you can't fault the New York lifestyle he's going to have. That's obviously a big plus for anyone joining the NFL. Certainly where I'd like to be in New York. Rory, your take on the Malik Neighbors, body language, and the move overall?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of them things, and you hear a lot and you see a lot, and you were sort of presuming. But yeah, Neighbors, I mean, if you look at the teams that were picking before, he had Arizona and Los Angeles. So maybe he's a fan of the warm weather. Maybe he was disappointed he missed out on those two spots. But I think he needs to see it as he's the building block now that they're going to start the regime under. And I can't see Daniel Jones, unless he does something spectacular this year, staying on any longer past this season. So Neighbors really is the building block for the quarterback that they're going to drop in, whether it's a veteran that they pay on the free agent market next season or a rookie in the draft next year. So I think under Daboll, he's a fantastic offensive mind, and I think they will have a system that will get Neighbors the ball. So eventually, I think, like you say, the New York lifestyle and maybe a new quarterback next season will put a smile on his face.
Yeah, you'll know more than me, Rory. I'm Freddy. I mean, I've not heard great things about the draft class next year in terms of quarterbacks. Would that something you would agree with?
At the minute, yeah, it's not as top heavy, but obviously we've seen it before, haven't we? If you look at Jaden Daniels this season, he wasn't in a position where anybody sort of had him plugged in as an obvious round one pick. We've seen it with Joe Burrow, had a fantastic season at LSU, just the one season really that propelled him to number one overall draft pick. So there is a couple of names you're looking at: Carson Beck, Shadur Sanders at Colorado. But there's as good a chance as any that somebody will come out of the blue. There tends to be always quarterbacks. I know he had that draft where Kenny Pickett was sort of the only number one round one selection for quarterbacks. But usually somebody comes to the fore, and especially how passing orientated football is now, somebody will put up big numbers and they'll be in play, I think, next year.
And of course, I believe the year after that, maybe if not the year after that as well, Arch Manning will be eligible to be drafted. And I don't know whether he's got a big boots to fill, having his grandfather and uncles in Peyton Eli to follow, but that's a big family responsibility. And I think I do fear for the latest McCaffrey who's come into the NFL, but he could be the guy everyone looks towards. I haven't seen him play for Texas, but if he's half as good as his brothers were, if he's got Peyton's ability and Eli Manning's postseason clutchness, he's the perfect quarterback. But it may just be like a situation where it's like Jordy Cruyff, where he can't live up to his dad's reputation in Man U. Now, quick boys, and I know I've asked both of you just in a private one-on-one chat about your take on your own team's NFL draft picks. But just for the purpose of the audience, Freddie, we'll go to you first. What was your take on overall the Pittsburgh Steelers, which was probably my least favorite team's draft picks this year?
Well, yeah, it was quite funny because you and I were talking about which players both teams wanted, and you were listing exactly the same players that I wanted as the Steelers, and thankfully we were above you in every single round, so we were able to get the players we wanted. But yeah, we had 4 or 5 fairly major needs, and we've managed to fill 3 of them with starting caliber players. I mean, with Troy Fautanu shouldn't be picked 20 in the draft; he should have been much higher. He had a couple of injury concerns, and obviously with all the teams going for quarterbacks, he dropped to 20, so that was a bit of a steal. Zach Frazier, we got our center. Again, that was looking a bit nervy when the Raiders went and took JPJ a few picks before. I was thinking, well, we are actually going to get our center or not, but we got that. And then we got the 2 Wilsons, Roman Wilson, who's a talented, probably will play in the slot, so we're still missing an outside receiver, but a talented receiver, and possibly, again, one of the best linebackers in the draft in Peyton Wilson as well. So 4 very solid picks that could all be starters on day one. And then a backup guard in Mason McCormick, which most people thought would go much higher. So I think we had a very, very strong draft. There are still holes in the team, but with what we had and the holes we had, it's as good a draft as we could possibly have done, really, I think. So yeah, we look a better team than we did this time last year. Will that translate into playoff success or division success? Well, the AFC North, as Rory knows full well, is brutal. So we'll see. But I'm pretty happy with where we are after last week.
And what grade would you give the overall?
I don't do draft grades because they're utterly ridiculous. Tell me in 4 or 5 years, and then I'll tell you. But no, draft grades are just silly.
Well, Rory, I have also already asked you your thoughts, but yeah, again for the audience, tell me your thoughts on the Bengals picks overall, and if you want to, you can give a grade as well.
Yeah, I would put this down as the boom or bust draft for the Cincinnati Bengals. It got a lot of good reception from the media, but as a fan, it's one of those where it's a little bit sort of cringing and thinking that there's a lot of swings here where these could be fantastic players, but there's a lot of question marks everyone. So obviously, Amarius Mims in the first, the size, the profile, the athleticism, fantastic, but the experience isn't there. He's not put it on tape. We've had 8 starts in college football, so obviously we're wondering, what can he do? Luckily, he doesn't have to come in and start, so he can develop. But obviously, there's that question mark over the experience. I really like the second round pick, Chris Jenkins out of Michigan. He fits the profile of what we need. We're a bit short at defensive tackle. He's an excellent run stuffer. So we'll plug him in there. I think he'll do really well. Obviously, Jermaine Burton, I think I had him quite high in my wide receiver rankings, but obviously the off-field stuff, and the character things where they were flagging up saying that perhaps needed to have a bit better maturity, things like that. And it's unusual for the Bengals to go down that route because so much of Zach Taylor's ethos has been character players who are captains, and players basically that don't have any red flags. So a lot of these players were people that weren't on the Bengals fans boards because we didn't think that's the route that he would go. So it's an interesting one, but very high upside. McKinley Jackson was the nose tackle. We were desperate for a nose tackle, and that was a bit of a reach really because there's just not that much talent at that position. And then again later in the draft, we've got Eric Hall, fantastic when he has played, but he's had major back surgery. He's also torn his ACL, so he'll be recovering from that in the preseason. Tanner McLaughlin as well, another one high upside, but obviously injury concerns. And then Matt Lee rounded it off. I think he's probably one of the guys that I'll be interested in, even though he's a 7th rounder. He could be our center of the future out of Miami. So I think overall, I like the draft class. It's just how many of these guys are actually going to reach the potential.
Interesting times. Now, I'm going to give the Dolphins a C plus for our draft. I think I think we could have gone down different routes, and I do think that again we would have gone for someone like Vitano if he hadn't gone to the Steelers. The Chop Robinson pick, I don't mind. I think they were saying on the coverage at the time that his stats don't do him justice because he does a lot of disrupting without actually getting the sacks and the tackles for loss. So for me, I'm happy with it, and there's definitely potential there. Same with Patrick Paul, who definitely more of a project. So I think the only thing I will say for that is that we're buying a lot of project players for a team that's in win now mode. I mean, Hill, Armstead, and Ramsey are both all three of them probably going to be retired within 3 years. We made all these, we traded up, we made all these, we went out and got Tyreek Hill, gave up 1st-round picks to get him, and we made these, got again Bradley Chubb and Jalen Ramsey making these win now moves. So I think that at that point maybe get a finished product rather than a project, which is why I maybe put him as a C plus. I'm excited by Malik Washington. He's very fast. But again, I don't like the fact we gave up a 3rd-round pick from next year for a running back when we've already got 2 good running backs in Mostert and A-Chain, where we could have gone a different position altogether. So for me, yeah, I'm not annoyed, but I'm not overly happy either. But then I must say, I said this in the Fins Nation podcast as well, is that we mustn't forget with drafts that JJ Watt got booed by Texans fans when he went on the stage. So you just don't know how it's going to turn out one way or the other. Finally, I want to ask you for your best and worst draft picks of the draft. I mean, worst, I think, I can imagine we all probably think it is probably Michael Penix, the Falcons. Any of you have anyone different, or would you both say that is the worst draft pick of the night, of the 3 days?
No, I think different. I think Bo Nix is the worst pick. I really don't get that. I think Denver completely and utterly reached there. They just got so desperate that they're in that position where they needed a quarterback, and they went for a guy who I like, but I don't see it working there in Denver whatsoever. And I can't stand Sean Payton. I think he's been living off the legacy of Drew Brees for far too long, and yeah, that's just meant to fail. So for me, I think the fact that Penix Jr. was picked so high by a team that didn't really need a quarterback overshadowed the fact that the Broncos really did reach for Bo Nix.
Interesting. Rory, your thoughts on the worst draft pick?
Them two were probably the ones in the 1st round. The couple that I had penciled in from day 2 were Tavondre Sweat to the Titans. I thought that was a little bit early. That was very early on day 2, and obviously the issues that he'd had with the DWI within a couple of weeks before the draft. He's had weight issues. He didn't weigh in at the combine. He was obviously struggles controlling his weight. I just think that's a real risky pick. And the other one was Fisk, Brandon Fisk to the Rams. I thought they paid a premium, really. They traded up and they gave up quite a lot to get him. And he's sort of a very similar profile to Kobe Turner, who did really well at defensive tackle for them last year. So that was a bit of a puzzling one. I thought you're sort of getting a similar type player and paying a premium. Didn't add up for me.
Best draft draft pick for me, I think I said before he was my draft crush. Terran Arnold going to the Lions. I thought that was a fantastic pick. I mean, they addressed probably their biggest need, and they got for me who I think personally the best draft pick. Sorry, the best draft prospect at that position in Arnold. You get a defensive back who can also return 9 turn-yard touchdowns. I think that's just and everything he does on the field. I really liked it, and the fact as well he got to do it, in front of the crowd. I thought that was a nice moment for the Detroit Lions fans, and I just really like that move and their team that probably cost their place in Super Bowl because of that position, and they went out and got the best guy available. So I really liked that pick. But Freddie, your best pick of the night?
I'm going to cheat here and pick two. But there's a reason I'm picking two because I'm going with Mitchell and DeJean from the Eagles because they've completely and utterly transformed their secondary with two great young talented players, and I thought both were steals. I thought Mitchell could have gone at least 10 picks higher, and DeJean should have gone in the first round. So yeah, I think the Eagles absolutely smashed it with those two. And again, I think anyone who picked defense in the first round almost took a steal as well. I mean, you could name hundreds of players that, well, not hundreds, but a lot of players that I think in any other draft where teams weren't so desperate for offensive players, that some very, very, very good players right at the top of defensive picks were taken much later than they should have done.
Yeah, there's a lot of defensive talent, and I think cornerback. Has seemingly a great draft for that, as well as offensive tackle. But yeah, I was just so shocked that they took so long to make a defensive pick. Rory, your best pick of the draft?
Well, I'm going to give you a couple from later on again. So similar to you had Terry and Arnold. They also got Ennis Rakestraw, the Lions, and I think he's perfect for them. He just epitomizes everything. Sort of Dan Campbell. He's a proper physical, even though he's not the biggest. He's feisty and physical, and I think he'll fit in really well there. And then Junior Colson to the Chargers. Obviously, Jim Harbaugh coached him at Michigan, so that he's going to be really good to get into the. He's going to play sort of linebacker, and he's going to sort of run that defense. He'd be able to come in and straight away know what Harbaugh expects from the defense and lead them. So I thought that was a really nice match. And then obviously from Freddie's team, I thought Peyton Wilson was a bit of a steal for the Steelers. And being a Bengals fan, he's a guy that will sort of worry coming up again. I know there's injury concerns and how long he's going to last in the league, but I think he really fits in with what the Steelers are about, and he would worry me as a Bengals fan.
So before we do end the podcast, I want to quickly touch on what I think personally was a really good draft for the NFL in the UK and Ireland. I think first of all you had 3 draft picks announced live in Ireland. You had a Jaguars pick announced by a competition winner. You had a Love Island winner, Greg O'Shea, announcing a pick from Dublin, as well as a GAA star announced the Steelers pick in Ireland as well. And you add in the fact that you had multiple international fans of the year who were on stage. There were fans from all over Europe, and there were 3 guys who actually may be appearing on this podcast at some point this week. In Bears fans James Gowers, Packers fan Daniel Hanbridge, and as well as Lions fan Ryan Farden. They might be on this week to discuss their journey, and I think that was really cool to bring more exposure to the international game and the international fan base. But I think the biggest thing for me, the big thing I think was in the 7th round of the NFL draft, Basingstoke's own Travis Clayton was taken by the Buffalo Bills, and normally this time of year, this time of the draft, they're all picked at home. No, but with this one, he actually came on stage, and I think the fact he came on stage with a Union Jack on his back, I think was a really special moment for NFL in the UK and Ireland, and also I think just a groundbreaking moment for the IPP. I think obviously Mailata has been the biggest story in terms of that, but I think for the UK point of view, to have someone actually come on stage and be drafted, have a Union Jack on the back, I thought was just a fantastic moment, and I think that for me just really, it really is, that could be when we look back on in 10 years' time. I think we look at the Bears. I think when they took Williams and the Doomsday, I think that could be a moment they look back on in 10 years and think that changed our franchise's fate. But I do think that for the UK's growth, having a guy actually come on stage and be drafted, I think was. I don't think actually a player's actually come on stage before from the IPP. I think it's always been done sort of away from the draft, and I think to actually have a guy drafted in the NFL draft from the IPP, maybe the first guy to do it, I thought was a really cool moment. And just I want to say, actually, finally on the coverage, I want to go back to I completely forgot about this. Michael Penix. Why did they give the spoiler just before he got picked? Because I know they said it before the coverage started, fair enough, but I hadn't seen that bit, so I was watching it. Does not even think about Michael Penix being drafted there, and then Ian Rappaport comes on and says Michael Penix is on their radar, and then seconds later he gets drafted. And I just feel that maybe it would have added to the surprise element, the shock factor, if I hadn't heard that. Do you boys agree with that, or do you think maybe that's fine that was said?
Oh, it's annoying, and it's annoying on Twitter as well when you've got the coverage on and you already know the picks of pick 8 when you're watching pick 7 happening. So yeah, it's irritating, and ESPN were at it just as much as the NFL were. I want to just pick up on the IPP bit a minute because, as you say, it's great to see players drafted, and I did particularly enjoy the Bears fan going over there and announcing a punter pick because I love punters. So Tory Taylor getting picked in the 4th round was great. I thought it was a very good pick by the Bears. So yeah, it'd be a bit of a dream for me if I could go over to the Steelers and announce a long snapper a pick, but yeah, we'll give that a few years. But yeah, it's great to see these players finally getting the recognition they deserve. Obviously, we had Reece Sammet being signed up by the Chiefs earlier on in the off season. It does help having the extra spot on the roster for these players going forward, and the NFL are really pushing that growth. So it's great to see more and more players from abroad. But as Rory mentioned earlier, there's players that are picked in the NFL draft that don't get much experience. The Bengals took one, the Steelers took one or two that have not played much college and taken the jump and taken the punt. So now you've got that international option where people aren't playing that much in college or coming from a completely different direction. That actually, if you've got the physical attributes, why not take a punt on them? So I think it can only grow from here. So it's a really good starting point. Let's see how we get on in the next couple of years or so.
Yeah, Rory, your take on that, on what was a good moment for the IPP?
Yeah, it's fantastic, really, and he can become the almost a poster child, can it, for obviously everything that's going on, with everything. You know, we've got the Tottenham Stadium, we've got all the games coming over, and it's just fantastic, really, that we've got that we can the children like my kids growing up will grow up with it, and it's not just like this thing where I think it's getting more mainstream now. People are aware of it. It's not this thing where sort of just like an underground movement that watches it. I think it gets bigger and bigger, and obviously it starts with the Super Bowl, and you get a lot of British people now having Super Bowl parties, and it extends now to the draft, and obviously having a British player picked in the draft. The draft still is that little bit of thing where there is a bit of an underground. People just aren't as keyed in on what's going on in the UK, and that's growing as well. And I think this will grow it, and the excitement that the draft is. Obviously, it's my favourite bit of the year. And I think there'll be a lot of British supporters that cling on to that now and say, oh yeah, I like that draft. I'm going to start watching a bit more college football. And I think as kids come through, there's a route there for them if they want to go and explore playing American football. They can do that now.
I think as well. I think that the draft can be a great way, I think, to choose your team. I know a friend of the show, Chris Pajak from Redman TV, said that he loved Randy Moss in college, and he said whichever team picks him in the draft, he'll be their team. So I think that's actually a really good way, especially if you've got to the NFL because you've watched Super Bowl, it was on, and you watched it randomly and you loved it, and you want to get into it. I think with such a long off season, I think it's a great chance for people to choose a team almost there. I mean, I always say try and watch a whole season, and you'll find a team you love that way. But I think a great way to do it for me is that, because I think that, say if you, it's probably hard if you haven't watched college football, but I think certainly it's a good way. If you go for the team with the first pick, you think, well, I can't be called a glory hunter if I do this. So yeah, I think certainly you could watch a few players in college and go, oh, I like that player, therefore I'm going to pick that team they go to. But yeah, I think hopefully that will bring more attention to the game, and I think that obviously hoping this year to once again be on media duties there, and I'm just hoping now we'll just see the game hopefully continue to grow more and more, which I know will mean less tickets available for fans with more demand. But I think, just overall growth of the game, then I think it's really, really important. But that is where we'll end the podcast for today. Hope you enjoyed the new theme tune. Do let me know in the DMs on the podcast if you liked it or not. And yeah, hopefully it will stick. But in the meantime, this has been the Across the Pod NFL podcast. Thank you to Rory and Freddy for coming on today.
Thanks for having us.
Cheers, Andy.
Always a pleasure, guys. We'll have you on again very soon, I'm sure. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed the draft, and we'll see you guys for the next episode.